Everything is meaningless in this world. Everything except one thing. If I could give one truth from Ecclesiastes that is the ultimate truth I would give from Ecclesiastes is what it says at the end. Not once, but twice. The book of Ecclesiastes ends 3 times. The first one is the collection of sayings that we did last time out of Ecclesiastes 11, final sayings for all time. You remember those? When it's time to work hard, enjoy it. When you see the sun, soak it in, enjoy it. You remember those? Work, sun, others, eat, drink, God. That's the first ending. The third time Ecclesiastes ends is the sermon we will do next time. The epilogue written/spoken by someone else, like a narrator, like the final speech in our town when the final speaker steps out on the apron of the stage and sums up the entire world. But this next to last ending in Ecclesiastes 12, 1 through 8, is what we might call the deathbed speech. It is an honest look at what the world looks like when you near the end. Closing time. The lights are being turned off. They turn off the music. The keys are hanging in the door as you walk out so that the manager or the security guard can shut it all down the minute you walk out. When I was a student at ACU, I used to stay every night until closing time in the library. And they would play "The Lord Bless You and Keep You" over these tinny shot speakers that rattled like hubcaps on unbalanced car wheels. To this day, I cannot hear "The Lord Bless You and Keep You" without standing up to pack my bag. A class I'm a part of right now at the YMCA currently goes until 9 p.m., closing time. And our teacher does not stop until the manager comes and taps his wrist and looks at our teacher. And so we load up, we make our way out the door, and we walk out into the next thing. This is the nature of life and death, according to the final word of Ecclesiastes. Load your bag, because there is a next thing. Remember earlier in this series when we talked about melodrama? We talked about those human stories that emphasize our experience, that emphasize the way that we feel in everyday lives when we actually allow ourselves to feel. At the core, they are human stories. Forrest Gump is about the 60s and 70s and 80s. That's true, but ultimately, it is a collection of human stories, real human stories. When you think about it, even a science fiction movie like 2001 is a human story. You think about it. There's a scene where a TV interviewer is interviewing a computer that is supposed to know and do everything. When the interviewer asks the HAL 9000 computer about the computer's own limitations, HAL, the computer in 2001, says, "We are foolproof and incapable of error." And while this may seem audacious, all you have to do is just think back a few years before the movie 2001, which was filmed in the 1960s. All you have to do is think back to just a few years before that movie was made. Think back to 1912 and a ship that they called the Titanic. They said that ship was unsinkable. This certainty, this hubris, is the opposite of wisdom. It is sheer folly. And so are many of the things we set our minds and hearts upon. In this world, we think that so many things are dependable, but they are not. We are living in a human story right now. Yes, COVID is horrible. This pandemic is terrible. But the story we are telling with our lives is about our connection. This, not just Ecclesiastes, but our story. This is a deathbed speech worth giving. This is our story when we will look back and tell it later, and when we do look back and tell it later. Let us say that it was a time of faith, hope, and love. And so we load up. We make our way to the door, and we walk out to the next thing. A month or so ago, I mentioned Baz Luhrmann's speech/song called Everybody's Free to Wear Sunscreen. The advice he dispenses about so many things in, again, what sounds like a commencement speech. But the advice he gives, like so many speeches of its kind, are meant to help you get through life. But much of it is actually about our connection to one another, such as his lines. Enjoy your body. Use it every way you can. Don't be afraid of it or what other people think of it. It is the greatest instrument you'll ever own. Dance. Even if you have nowhere to do it but your own living room. Read the directions, even if you don't follow them. Do not read beauty magazines. They will only make you feel ugly. Again, more from Luhrmann's Sunscreen speech. This one is right toward the very end. Some of his last lines in this speech that he gives. Accept certain inalienable truths. Prices will rise. Politicians will philander. You too will get old. And when you do, you'll fantasize that when you were young, prices were reasonable, politicians were noble, and children respected their elders. Respect your elders. Luhrmann's speech is like the final word of Ecclesiastes 12. And yes, it does end by saying everything is meaningless. But hear it in context. Ecclesiastes, one of its endings, the second ending, does end by saying everything is meaningless. But it ends that way on purpose as a reflection of the world. What it is saying is that everything is meaningless compared with the one thing that is not meaningless. Everything in the world is meaningless except one thing. And that is, remember your Creator. Just remember. Remember God. So just before the narrator closes the book, the actual speaker gives his final words. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain, when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men stoop. When the grinders cease because they are few, and those looking through the windows grow dim. When the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades. When people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. When people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets. When the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags itself along and desire no longer is stirred. Then people go to their eternal home, and mourners go about the streets. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless.